Welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this session, we are going to do a module on gender equality and equity, which is part of the course on gender and social work. I am Dr. Shivli Kumar, Associate Professor in School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. The topics to be discussed in this particular module is the concept of gender equality, gender equity and substantive equality, and principle of non-discrimination and affirmative action for women. When we come to the concept of gender equality, what we find that in most cultures, women and men are governed by power and privilege, which is socio-culturally constructed and which governs equality and equity within specific contexts of their lives. As defined by Reeves and Barden, gender equality denotes women having the same opportunities in life as men, including the ability to participate equally in the public sphere. Gender equity denotes the equivalence in life outcomes for women and men, recognizing their different needs and interests and requiring a redistribution of power and resources. Whilst gender equality talks of similar similar situations and opportunities for men and women, gender equity recognizes that women have different needs from the kind of needs that men have. Women have specific needs which are related to their reproductive health, which are related to their menstrual health, and these differences therefore need to be factored into any kind of processes that are undertaken for gender equality. And gender equity is a means to acquire gender equality. Gender equality is the goal of women's movement and their struggle for rights. Gender equality essentially talks about equality of opportunity as well as of outcome. When we talk of opportunity, it is critical for us to remember that because gender construction, the social construction of gender limits women's access to various opportunities. For example, going to school. In a society which is already unequal, it is understood that girls need to learn more of the household work rather than go for outside work. So the likelihood of girl children dropping out of education is higher than boy children. We find that specifically true of some of the South Asian nations and societies. Now, when we talk of gender equality, it is important that such cultural constructions are taken into consideration, and it's ensured that all children, including girl children, children with disability, children coming from discriminated communities, are all given the opportunity to go to school and complete their education as the same as the boys within the communities are given opportunity. Now, one of the things that's important is that when we talk of gender equality, it is a very broad term. It includes the processes of women empowerment. It includes that there is equality of opportunity by removing discriminatory barriers which may inhibit the opportunity that is available for women in different aspects of their life. It also aims at balancing the power relations that are existing in societies between men, women, and men, women in diverse communities as well. It indicates that people are free to make choices without the limitations set by stereotypes. So on the one hand, it says that gender equality propagates the idea that all people are same and have the same rights. On the other hand, it also recognizes that because there are stereotypical ideas, notions which are culturally constructed, therefore those are the inhibitors which create problems for people belonging to different genders to access these opportunities. However, gender equality propagates that these discriminations need to be taken care of, and genders, both men and women, have equality of opportunity and access to all kinds of resources within a community. So to ensure that all the states and societies and communities follow particular processes, gender equality is deeply embedded in international law. The legal framework is utilized by all those countries who have signed and ratified these instruments of law, which include the CEDAW as well as Sustainable Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals, and the Beijing Platform for Action. The Convention for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has been a major path-breaking international law which brought in the concept of gender equality. CEDAW is an instrument which looks at women's rights, women's access to equal resources, women's rights to equal justice frameworks, which should be embedded in each and every country which has signed and ratified this particular document. There are three principles that make up CEDAW's concept of equality. That is the principle of non-discrimination. Non-discrimination is critical for us to understand because cultural constructions, societal frameworks, societal norms create gender inequality. So when there is a legal framework, it says that, women cannot be discriminated on the basis of their caste, they cannot be discriminated on the basis of their gendered roles, which a culture may propagate and also ensure that discriminatory patterns continue. However, this particular principle makes sure that non-discrimination is included not just in the laws but also the policies and programmatic interventions of different states. The second principle that's critical for us to understand is the principle of state obligation. On the one hand, we talk about non-discrimination, and on the other hand, all states, all countries who have signed this law and who have ratified this law are obligated to ensure that they propagate programs, principles, as well as legal frameworks to ensure that women and men from different marginalized backgrounds are not discriminated. So, for example, if we look at women belonging to lower caste backgrounds, we have the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribe Atrocities Act, which ensures that women within lower caste and tribal backgrounds are not discriminated against, and if they are, they can take the legal recourse to the courts of law when they face violence and atrocities in the hands of upper caste men. The third principle that is very critical and important for us to keep in mind is the principle of substantive equality or equality of results. This will we will explain a little later in the later slides, but the one thing that is critical for us to remember is that CEDAW has played a very important role in ensuring the fashioning of international goals of development. So for example, the Millennium Development Goal had a strong component of ensuring better outcomes on maternal mortality and education for women, which now later has been transformed into Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, where gender equality and equity has been flagged in almost all the other goals as well. So gender equality has become an intersecting dimension in international evolution of different programs and policy documents. How is gender equity different from gender equality is something that we need to understand. By removing the discrimination in opportunities for women, one can achieve equal status for women. Therefore, a level playing ground is required to be set to remove all hindrances in participation and accessibility for women to achieve equality, which means that a certain amount of policy program and legal frameworks need to be provided by states which address specific needs of women, which would be the component where gender equity gets translated. For example, women need maternity leave, women need creches where they can leave their children behind so that they can work at peace in workplaces. They will also need policies which ensure breastfeeding breaks. They may also need policies for taking care of the children, so child care facilities need to be provided so that women can be freed of looking after children and they can work productively in formal work spaces. So this is just one example where women's specific needs need to be taken care of, and that would promote gender equity and equality. An enabling process and environment is what is propagated by the process of gender equity, which needs to be created for natural processes to happen smoothly without letting anyone feel inferior. So women should not be made to feel inferior, because often in workplaces we find that when women access their maternity rights or maternity benefits, it is generally understood that somebody else, and more so a man, will have to do so-called additional work burden or workload at the formal workplace, and therefore the effort is to hire less women and also consider women as inferior in such workplaces, without considering the fact that giving birth and also doing the reproductive work is also work. So gender equity denotes the equivalence in life outcomes for women and men and recognize their different roles, needs and interests, requiring a redistribution of power and resources. When we talk of redistribution of power and resources, what is critical for us to remember is that policies need to address women specific needs, and if that is not done, then the workplace is not recognizing that the contribution that women give to the society with regard to their reproductive work and what is considered to be unpaid work in our society today. An equity approach implies that all development policies and interventions need to be scrutinized for their impact on gender relations. Therefore, if a development policy is essentially targeting men and not looking at women's specific needs within that community, then it will not bring about equivalence in their lives. So if a poverty intervention program is addressing livelihood promotion for men and is not addressing the livelihood promotion for women, then perhaps there would be a propagation or continuation of inequality. So when we are looking at an equity approach, and when we are looking at the impact, we will find that while men have become more powerful by accessing different productive resources, women continue to be subservient to men within the household, and they have no voice or decision making power in terms of the money that comes into the household, and therefore that particular policy is not gender equitable. It necessitates a rethinking of policies and programs to take into account of men's and women's different realities and interests, which I have already talked about in the earlier slide, that men's realities are very different from women's realities. Women's realities are linked to the work that they do within household, the caregiving work, as well as the reproductive role that they play in societies. So unless and until policies address the drudgery of the housework, the reproductive roles that they play, it will not really bring about a change in the gendered outcomes and gender equality. And therefore it is essential that policies and programs intervene and in these kind of spaces, which are usually largely delegated as private spaces by the state. It is important to remember that these are not just private spaces, but these are spaces which are generally considered and seen as invisible. Therefore, they need to be made visible and accounted for, and state policies and programs need to intervene at these levels as well to free women to productively as well as constructively engage with the poverty alleviation and developmental programs. For example, after much after much struggle, women have been able to achieve reservations in the Panchayati Raj institutions, which in itself ensures that women come into power positions where they can make sure that women-related specific programmatic interventions are done actively and effectively, at least at the level of the local governance in the rural and urban areas. It sets a level playing ground for both genders, and at the same time some special provisions are required for historically disadvantaged communities. The principle of non-discrimination is also very critical when we talk of gender equality and equity. CEDAW's definition of discrimination includes that discrimination can exist in different forms, distinctions, exclusions, or restrictions. These exclusions, distinctions and restrictions are usually given the name of culture or societal norms or religious practices. However, CEDAW actively propagates that these kind of discriminatory practices need to be addressed by the state and action and steps taken to remove them, and they should not be given the whole, they should not be not addressed in the garb of cultural relativism. Therefore, CEDAW enables the possibility of including a variety of discriminatory practices that can be encountered at times even in the form of rights or protection. For example, some laws can be said to be by states said to be gendered, and yet they seem to be protectionist. For example, not allowing women to work at night, saying that it's unsafe for women in our society to work outside, that they'll face all forms of sexual harassment and violence. However, CEDAW enjoins on states to provide conditions of safety and security at all points of time for women to be productively engaged. So states need to ensure that such laws which may be inhibiting women's freedom to undertake certain vocations or undertake work, productive work, they should be done away with. So states have to be continuously look at laws, look at policies which may be protectionist or which may be considered to be rights-based but are actually inhibiting women from accessing productive resources, spaces, and public spaces as well as private spaces with a sense of security and sense of freedom. CEDAW obligates the state to recognize women's rights, to provide the material and spiritual conditions so that all of us can enjoy it, and to create the mechanisms for denouncing their violations and obtaining redress. Another very important dimension that CEDAW enjoins states to do is to provide mechanisms wherever rights or freedoms of women are violated so that they can redress and they can ask for justice. And this comes in the form of the legal mechanisms which a state can evolve at different points of time as society evolves. CEDAW also enjoys that states should provide services specific to women's needs like childcare, maternity benefits, appropriate transportation, safety from violence, and mechanisms to address sexual harassment which are linked to women's biological roles as well as cultural situations. States should also undertake steps which are should not undertake steps which are protectionist. For example, debarring women from going to say for example bars or restaurants, and also at the same time preventing women from accessing all possible resources which men are similarly doing. So it may come up with a law to say that women are not supposed to go out at night after 11 o'clock. A lot of academic institutions may also set up security guards outside hostels of women, but not really ensure that men are trained to respect women's dignity, safety, and expressions. So in many ways, just ensuring security systems and trying to protect women will definitely not ensure that women become, the society becomes gender equal. What is required is ensuring that the men and the institutions understand that women have equal rights in all spaces of an institutional system and in all times and in all kind of access to all kinds of resources. We come to the principle of substantive equality, which CEDAW has highlighted, and which is a very significant element of gender equality. The principle of substantive equality requires that states take two kinds of actions, that are actions to achieve equality of opportunity between men and women, that is de jure within the legal framework and within policy and programmatic interventions, and actions to correct the inequalities of power between men and women, that is in the ground. If there is a law, it should be able to function accordingly to ensure that women are actually able to access all the resources that are available to men and are also free from violence and oppression. So de facto means that it is actually available to them, it is visible, it is shown in various empirical evidences, and women are getting empowered. The first type of action requires that all women, regardless of their race, ethnicity, caste, disability, have the right to equality of opportunity. When we talk of equality of opportunity, the barriers are created within cultural constructions, community notions and ideas and myths that are propagated, and these need to be addressed by the state. The state has to ensure that these myths, these ideas, these cultural constructions are deconstructed, removed either by legal frameworks or by policy interventions or by programmatic interventions, and there only equality of opportunity will be made available to women, and access to such resources then become freely and easily available to both men and women. This must be guaranteed through, as I mentioned earlier, through laws, policies with their respective mechanisms and institutions to ensure compliance, which would also include that various actors within these institutions understand what really gender equality and substantive equality means. So the state also has to play a role in promoting the notion and idea of substantive equality and non-discrimination. Affirmative action for women is something that is understood within the CEDAW, because historically women have been relegated to unequal status. It is well understood, there is plenty of empirical evidence, researches and understanding that has come up over so many decades. So it is today accepted that women are not a single category, and their experiences of discrimination is based not just on gender but also on intersecting identities of race, caste, color, ethnicity, religion and region. So if this is so in most societies, then it is important that these intersecting identities are recognized as being marginalized. These communities are recognized and understood, and that they require affirmative action to make sure that they have easy access to various resources of development is something that the state is enjoined with by the CEDAW. Hence, it is not possible to address various forms of discrimination without acknowledging that there are differences of experience of discrimination, and evolving similar measures which address these specifics of location of women within these particular identities and communities. For example, Dalit women may face different forms of discrimination which is caught within the axis of their being women, their being Dalit and their being poor. Similarly, when we talk of women belonging to different religious identities, the most marginalized at this point in India are the Muslim women. So how do we address and understand Muslim women's specific concerns and discriminations has to be within the axis of intersections of there being women, there being Muslim, and there being poor in the larger context. So it is enjoined upon the state that certain affirmative actions, certain key interventions which are addressing these discriminations need to be put in place, which will be different from other women. And therefore, CEDAW acknowledges these intersectionalities and has directed the signatory states to ensure temporary measures of affirmation and special steps to reach out to all women, addressing all forms of these discriminations. So, overarchingly, in this particular module, to summarize, brings forth the concepts of gender equality, equity, and substantive equality. It is critical that any work that is to be done with women and men should utilize a clear understanding of these concepts, as they enable a critical analysis of the gender equality present in the given society, community, and the state. For social workers, this is specifically important to have these concepts because they are working directly with people, and when they work with people, these principles enable us to see specific problems that women may have within these different community contexts and locations. While CEDAW as an international legal instrument gives emphasis to the need to locate gender equality in all policy programs and interventions by the state, these concepts also have a larger value and principle of working with the people. These human rights principles enable feminist practice and act as guiding principles for social workers to ensure the progress towards gender equity and gender just world. There are some references that you would like to look at to increase the information and understanding of gender equality and equity. Some of these which you would like to look at would be Reeves and Baden, Gender and Development Concepts and Definitions. You can also look at the DSC source book on concepts and approaches linked to gender equality. You can definitely look at the CEDAW document which is available on the website of the UN to understand the legal framework of gender equality and equity. Thank you.